series, and I'm going to discuss work that we have done in the area of supply chain networks, and specifically we are trying to address the question of whether market-based supply networks that we typically observe in practice, whether or not they are resilient but in an efficient manner. And this is joint work with Chuan Du, who is the Federal Reserve Board, and is also here online, and Joseph Stiglitz from Columbia University. So basically, the main key research question that we are trying to answer in this paper is whether or not market-based supply networks are fragile. And I mean, one part of the motivation for this research question came from observing what the various type of distress that happened in the global and in the local supply networks, especially during periods such as the COVID-19 and like more recently during the war in Ukraine. So every time we observe distress, the question is whether or not this is the manifestation of a market failure, or instead that's not the case. Because I mean, after all, if we want to basically expect firms to prepare for every possible contingency, let's say occurrence of a war or some disaster caused by natural phenomenon, or pestilence and so on. I mean, if we ask firms to be prepared and have some contingency plans against the occurrence of these events, this would be very inefficient, because you cannot, of course, expect to be hedged against all possible risks that can occur. So that's why we believe that it's important, especially for policymakers, to identify whether or not there is a market failure, and if there is a market failure, characterize what are the main determinants, and once you know what are the determinants, see whether there is a compelling reason for an intervention. And that's basically what we do in this paper. And what we show is that there exists somewhat a wedge between the market solution, which is the equilibrium, the privately emerging equilibrium in this model, and the socially constrained optimal solution. And we show that this inefficiency takes the form of an underinvesting in the production capacity. So basically, we show that, and this will be, I will demonstrate it with a model, that there is an underinvestment by the firms in capacity which it cannot be scaled on a short notice, for example, factories, buildings, or other infrastructure, especially when there are shocks. And these shocks could be both small or large. And we show that this wedge exists because there is a pecuniary externality. So the idea is that upstream firms who are providing intermediate goods to downstream firms do not really internalize in full the efficiency gains of building this production capacity ex ante. So that means that upstream firms will lean towards underinvesting in the non-scalable production capacity relative to what a social planner who faces the same constraints as the firms in terms of technology, in terms of information, would do. So in short, basically, we show that K star, which is the level of production capacity chosen by the firms in equilibrium, is smaller than KSP, which is the level of investment in the non-scalable production capacity chosen by a social planner. Then once we have answered this question, we try to study what are the underlying causes of these pecuniary externalities, why these are not internalized by the market. And basically, we end up showing that this is due to a combination of two main sources of imperfection. First, there is market power. And essentially, the market power comes from the fact that, as we just said, upstream firms essentially tends to sub-invest in production capacity because they enjoy product differentiation. So that means that intermediate goods that we have in the model are imperfect substitutes. And also, there are a finite number of these firms, so they engage in an oligopolistic competition rather than a perfect competition. And they end up basically passing on the changes in the marginal cost that they incur through price adjustment. So they can basically take advantage of the market, the spot market, to adjust the prices and charge more to the firms that want to buy these goods. And the second, essentially, source of market imperfection is the incompleteness. And the idea is that we don't have access to a full set of out-of-the-blue securities in this market. So that means that we cannot expect firms to be hedged against all possible sources of risk that can occur, all possible realization of demand or supply shocks. But still, downstream firms, which are the ones which are like producing the output and selling it to the final consumer, can still purchase inputs from these upstream firms, the so-called intermediate good producer in the model, through two markets. There is a spot market and the future market, right? That's, I think, what we have in the model. And in a way, the future market is acting, also referred to as the pre-order market in this presentation, is basically providing some level of insurance to the firm. So if they want to lock in a specific quantity of the intermediate good at a certain price, they can do so by writing a future contract with the intermediate good producers, and therefore they will basically be delivered the item in the quantities that they want at that locked in price in the next period. But somewhat what we show is that an over-reliance on the spot market in equilibrium is making this externality stronger and stronger. And the magnitude, like the size of this wedge, so how large is this inefficiency, depends on three main factors. One is the scalability of the industry. So what we show is that if the industry is more scalable, then this wedge will be smaller. Also, it depends on the substitutability of the input used by the firms. So if they are able to substitute away input from one intermediate good producer to the other in an easier manner, then this inefficiency would be smaller. In fact, this inefficiency would be completely eliminated, for example, if all the intermediates good producers are perfect substitutes of each other. And also, what we show is that
Agostino, just a clarification question. So you mentioned that full competition would eliminate the externality altogether. So even if there was full competition, market still will be incomplete. So does it mean that market incompleteness?
No, sorry, you're right. Like there is still like the market incompleteness part, right?
And market incompleteness by itself, I thought it would still create an over-reliance on the spot market, even if there is no market power.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so part of the externality will disappear.
Yeah, exactly. But
not entirely. Okay.
That's right. And also like the fact that there is more competition means there is more competition between the firms in the intermediate good producers. This will also make the externality smaller. And I think the one important thing to note is that this suboptimality, this inefficiency that we observe in terms of the difference between the solution computed by the social planner and the solution that emerged in equilibrium is that it's not really we don't really need large shocks for this inefficiency to manifest itself. But even though we have even if we have small shocks, then we will still observe this inefficiency. And also, the results do not really rely on risk aversion, right? In the sense that we are not imposing risk aversion on the side of the agent in this model. So neither intermediate good producer nor final good producers are risk averse. In fact, they're risk neutral. And also, the social planner is assumed to be risk neutral. So we still see that there is this suboptimality of investment in production capacity on the side of the agents in the model. When firms are risk neutral. Okay, so that's basically a bit an overview of what is in the paper. So now what I'm going to do in the next slide is showing how we obtain this result. Before we do so, I would like to briefly mention some literature which is related to the topic that we are studying in this paper. Of course, this is by no means exhaustive. I think we need definitely to relate the paper also to other works that have been done in the area. But essentially, I think one point to make is that there's been a lot of work that has been done in the context of understanding how a shock which originates through in the supply network amplifies through the network, and understanding all the mechanisms that leads to this amplification. There has also been some work which has looked at how firms strategically respond to shocks when the objective is to mitigate the effect of supply chain disruptions. And also there's been some recent literature as well on the endogeneity of these networks, like how the input and output linkage in a network are formed. I think what we do is basically, or one distinguishing feature of our work compared to this literature is that we are really focusing on understanding what are the root causes of this market failure. And also, we don't really rely on networks in the sense that, the network part arises endogenously when firms are efficient. So essentially, in our model, firms are deciding, especially this final good producer, are deciding with which intermediate good producer firms to transact with. Okay, so that's just brief note. Let's go on. Essentially, the main result is really this fact that there is suboptimality in capacity investment by the firm relative to a social planner benchmark who faces the same constraint as the firms. And this is what I want to demonstrate using model. So then what we do is we build a very stylized model, which is like simply.
Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, sure.
Before you proceed to the model, because you're in the literature review.
Yeah.
I'm not really an I/O person, but there's kind of this old I/O literature on vertical integration and kind of like a hold-up problem that seems kind of be related. Is that related? Is that something totally different, or?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, go ahead.
No, just like go, please.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think it will be great if you could definitely point us to the relevant works. I think. The vertical integration part is not the main focus here, in the sense that we are not trying to understand whether, for example, the final good producer, so the firm, wants to vertically integrate with the intermediate producer. So that's not, if this is I think one views this as the vertical integration, like saying that two layers of the supply chain network, like downstream and upstream, would we be better off if they integrate with each other? We're not really looking at these mergers between different layers in the network. That's I think my first takeaway on that. But we haven't thought about that. There might be some interesting implications coming out of this as well. But just that the focus that we want to analyze is really this effect. It's not, in a way, it's like as if it's the intermediate good, these final good producer firms are trying to optimally decide with which firms in the upper layer of the network, which is these intermediate good producers, to transact with, and what basically, and these interactions will give rise to this externality, the fact that the intermediate good firms may not invest sufficiently in ex-ante production capacity because they can pass on the cost of this. If they are not ready to deliver, they can always charge the cost that they will incur in the spot market to the final good firm. So it's really, if we vertically integrate this will disappear. But thanks for pointing this out. So the model, basically, as I mentioned, is a stylized model. I think we believe that this is like a simple model which still delivers the main forces that drive this wedge. We have essentially an upstream sector first of all, it's a circular economy with two main sectors. One sector is the sector of intermediate good producers. The other sector is the sector of final good producers. There is an upstream sector that consists of N intermediate good producers. These are the nodes that you see located around circle. In this simple example, we have 3 intermediate good producers, which are labeled by 0, 1, and 2. And they are located around this circle. And then there is a downstream sector, which consists of a continuum of final good producers that are, in this presentation, they're indexed by I to distinguish them from the intermediate good producers, which are indexed by J. And they are organized into market segments between the intermediate good nodes. For example, between the intermediate good producer J equal to 0 and J equal to 1, all the segment that you see in black identifies basically the final good producers, which can source input from 0 or 1. In equilibrium, basically, we will see that they decide to go either from 0 or 1. And the final good producers are basically purchasing these intermediate goods from the upstream firms because they need it as an input for production. So in order to produce the final good and deliver it to consumer, they need to buy input from the intermediate good producers. And QIJ is basically is defining the network, and it's the quantity of intermediate goods that I is purchasing from J. So final good producer I is purchasing from intermediate good producer J. This quantity will be determined endogenous in equilibrium, and this will basically identify the network. So that's what I meant before, that the network arises in a way endogenously. It's a bilateral network. It's a bipartite network, right? The final good producer and intermediate good producers.
Hi, Agostino. This is Juno. Just a clarifying question.
Yeah, sure.
So could a downstream firm connect it to or buy from multiple upstream firms, or is it just like one-to-one?
Yeah. So basically in the paper we show that in equilibrium it happens that you will always pick one intermediate good producer to buy from. That's optimal to do that. But I mean, I think in the end we are not excluding from the set of strategy space that you may end up purchasing from multiple intermediate good producers. Good. The upstream the upstream layer essentially is consisting of intermediate good producers, as I mentioned, and they what they do is, this is really where the most significant dynamics of the model occurs, where the main decisions are being made. And these intermediate good producers are setting prices to fulfill endogenous demand from final good producers. So the final good producers are choosing, are demanding the goods, and final good producers, intermediate good producers are setting the prices. And they meet this demand from the final good producer using a Cobb-Douglas production function, where the key really modification that we make to the standard Cobb-Douglas production function that we all know comes from the presence of a partial delay. So there are like two inputs. One is the L, which is basically typically it's used, the classical economic literature is used to denote labor. Here it's basically used to denote the scalable input factor, which is essentially the input factor that can be scaled up when production occurs. And the cost of this input is WJ. And then there is the non scalable input factor, which comes at the price RJ. And this is really what needs to be played one period in advance and cannot be adjusted easily in the short run in response to shock. So this, one way to think about the non scalable input factors could be like infrastructure, building factories, right? You have to reserve them one period before production occurs, because you will not be able to basically adjust it on a short notice. And what happens is that the importance of the scalable input factor relative to the non scalable input factor is denoted by alpha J. So that's really a parameter which measures the scalability of sector J. So if alpha J is basically larger, closer to 1, that means that this Cobb-Douglas production will mainly use the scalable input factor. So the industry is very scalable. If alpha J is close to 0, that means that there is a lot of non-scalability in this production function. And cost shocks are basically modeled as uncertainty over W. So these are like the supply shocks in the model. And we don't impose any significant structure over the distribution. So all what we need is that this distribution is bounded both from below and from above. So the cost shocks has to be between WJ underline and WJ bar. And this distribution, which is has bounded support, has a cumulative distribution function and the probability density function HJ. And technically, yeah.
Sorry. So so KJ here isn't then precisely capacity, right? In the second period, firm J could have preferred to produce less than KJ, depending on other circumstances, right?
Yes, but this
if
is
the option was given.
Yes, but 1 point, Salman, this KJ is basically a decision that you make at time in period 0. So in period 0, you have to decide how much production, how much investment you want to make in production capacity, and you cannot really change your decision in period 1. Yes.
So in some models, it's innocuous because you would always use your capacity to the fullest, but it feels like there is a little bit of a monopolistic competition here, and it's not clear in period 1. You would actually want to use your entire capacity. Am I wrong? Or would you always prefer to use your entire capacity in period 1 after you've chosen KJ in period 0?
After you have chosen KJ in period 0, I mean, whether or not you will be using the full Y, the production capacity to produce. I mean, this will again depends on. I mean, equilibrium will decide whether or not you want to use production. You
can choose then.
Yeah, you can choose. I mean, K is chosen.
Yeah, no, in period 1, do I choose how much of KJ to utilize or not?
I will let Chuan maybe answer this question, who might have a better idea. Chuan, do you want to?
Sure, but I think there's maybe just a application. So K is not some maximum amount of capacity you can do. It's really just another input into the production function. The key difference is needs to be put in place 1 period in advance. But related to your question, you're right. It's possible if you're not optimizing, or even if you're optimizing, to put in too much K relative to what you would have liked to have done ex post in the second period.
Yes.
And that's kind of one of the crucial tensions we have.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. There is another question, I think, Paula.
Yes, hi. Just a clarifying question on the source of uncertainty here comes from cost shocks to the scalable input.
Right.
But you didn't have any uncertainty on the non-scalable input, for example, to the extent that it could be damaged in the non-scalable input and just coming from cost shocks, basically.
Yes, I think the shock is a good question. So the shocks are only to I mean, there are shocks to the scalable input to W, and then there will be shocks to demand. We don't have shocks to the prices RJ. Like we have the two sources of randomness are basically cost shocks and demand shocks. So cost shocks are supply shocks, and they're in terms of the scalable input factor. Yeah. Because I mean, I think the idea is that the decision that you make on how much to invest in the non-scalable input, this is decided today, right? So that's why today you would know what is RJ. But that would be another example. You're saying, okay, what if you don't know what is RJ, for example? That would be essentially another source of uncertainty. That could be incorporated. I don't think it would change too much the main forces that we have. We just have to now look at, I mean, we have to take into account that we have, when we decide K, there will be also these additional sources of uncertainty.
Agostino, Carlos here. Just hi. Do you need for your results to kind of show the main theorem? Do you need any sort of degree of heterogeneity of alphas across sectors or firms?
Yeah,
so that's one, and the other one is like I'm thinking. I guess that the alpha is kind of a manifestation of the frictions and the type of technology we have. Yeah. But if I'm thinking really in the long run, and if a firm realizes that it's not profitable or not as profitable as some another firm, maybe you will converge to a situation where most of the firms have similar alphas. Otherwise, all the other firms are dead. Basically, they disappear. I understand why you need that kind of friction, but there is any set of distribution over alphas that you need for your
so I mean
result to manifest.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think when we solve the model analytically, we will basically impose some sort of homogeneity. to get tractable, which buys us a lot of tractability. In the paper, we also analyzed numerically, or we did some numerical analysis of what happens when we have heterogeneity. But it's a good point. But in order to apply these forces, I mean, the point is that we don't need really to impose heterogeneity in the model. Like even with homogeneous agents, we will be able to get the main results.
Agostino, just so that I understand the model, it seems to me mathematically the following would be equivalent, correct? Which is, instead of having a Cobb-Douglas, I could interpret my K as a choice of my future marginal cost curve.
Yeah, I think it's a good way of, exactly.
And so I'm curious, why not just do it that way? I guess to me it seems easier to think about choosing my marginal cost curve than.
Yeah, instead of K, you basically choose your marginal cost curve. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good suggestion. Juan, you want to say something? You raised the hand. Yeah,
that's a very good observation. In fact, when we try to solve this analytically and we impose symmetry, K only affects marginal cost. But as we will explain shortly, if we relax this kind of symmetry in some simplifying assumptions, in the general case, K is also going to impact the markup that each individual firm is going to price on top of them. So that neat separation no longer happens in the more general.
Thank you.
So let's now go to the next agents, which are the final good producers. And for these agents, we use a more reduced form approach to model. Essentially, they face exogenous demand from the consumers for their outputs Q with unit valuation V. And what final good producers do is they convert the intermediate good inputs into final goods using a linear production function. This linear production function is basically captured through this I. And what we see, in fact, is that I mean, the total production is not really the sum of the Qij, but it's the sum of the Qij divided by this function f dij. And this is done to take into consideration that intermediate good producers are imperfect substitutes of each other. So if there is a larger, the degree of substitutability between this intermediate good producer is measured by the distance penalty function fd, where dij is the distance in the circle between final good producer I and intermediate good producer j. So the further i's from j, the larger is this distance dij, and the less efficient is good j in the i's production.
So, and quick question. Since the downstream firms are kind of translating through a fixed valuation, can I also think of this model as the intermediate goods producers being the producers and the downstream being just the consumers? And I can have this y times v will be the valuation. So I'm asking, do you need to have like a whole chain, or it would be the same result?
I think we need this chain, because I mean, you think saying that instead of having the final good producer sourcing, inputting from the intermediate good producer, you have the consumers which are ordering directly from the intermediate good producers.
Yes, and that their valuation, it depends on the distance in that particular way, which we write in the Salop model, the circle. I have different valuations based on the distance from the producer. That's fine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think conceptually, I think it's basically better to maintain this distinction, like there is an exogenous, but I think in terms of results, as long as you have this friction captured by the distance. So, instead of thinking about the distance between final good producer and intermediate good producer J, you would think of the distance of the final good, this consumer from an intermediate good producer. That basically would end up capturing same results. It's just that it's easier to think of like in the context of a supply chain that there are different tiers, like one tier produces and provides goods to the tier below, and then the tier below is selling to the consumer, who are a little bit outside of the supply chain. That's, I think, the reason why we decided to model it in this way.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Agostino,
yeah,
you mentioned that there will be bilateral link and just a final good producer would choose only one intermediate good producer, right?
In equilibrium, that's what we will find.
Because of the linearity of this function, right? Linear production function. So basically, I'm gonna focus on the most productive intermediate firm for me.
Right. Yeah.
There is distance-based penalty, so I'm gonna choose the closest one. But this aggregation could be nonlinear as well, like maybe some type of CES. Then actually I will have demand from all of them. So is it essential for the results that this is linear, or is it just a tractability assumption?
I think it's mostly a tractability. I think if we have a nonlinear function, we might end up exactly in a set situation which is potentially along the lines of what you're saying, maybe multiple. I mean, there might be some possibility where you might find it profitable to purchase from multiple intermediate good producers, but which one is also worked out the details. Which one do you want to add something in terms of this assumption?
Yes. So you're right. The fact it's linear is mainly for tractability. The f function you can specify any way you wish, but we explicitly ruled out demanding from multiple possible intermediate good suppliers, apart from the corner cases where you're indifferent between two, mainly for tractability, as you mentioned. And as for the other question about can the final goods producers just be consumers? I think mathematically there's zero distance between the final good producers and the consumers who just has a valuation B. But it's useful to think of them as final good producers because, as you will see later, we have this future market versus spot market dynamics. And it's we normally think about firms engaging the future markets rather than consumers direct.
Yeah.
Agostino.
Yeah.
So in the context of supply chains, we're typically concerned with complementary inputs, right? I mean, I have the whole car, I just cannot find the chip, right?
Yeah.
So that's the bigger debate, right? And so in that sense, it feels like focusing on the case of perfect substitutability or a version of it is kind of missing some part of the picture, right? So is there a way, for example, yi could be the minimum of like these weighted inputs, right? Across a group of subsets of inputs that would capture both some substitutability between some inputs, but you need complementarity between some other groups, right? So is there a way to kind of extend this to capture some sort of complementarity?
Yeah, so you're saying that first, I think it's I think we agree that actually the intermediate producer are imperfect substitutes precisely because we have this function f, right? F of x. Suppose that the distance is between I and j is x. Then if x is larger, then this input will be less suitable for this item. Produce this item, and therefore you will basically be able to exploit it less. You will be able to, like if you need a specific material for a production and you get a material which is close to it but not exactly that, then this will basically come up here in this model. So I think it depends on how you specify the function. Like for example, if the function f of x is equal to 1, so no matter what's the distance, you still benefit entirely from an input provided from any intermediate good producer in the circle, then you have the case of perfect complementarity that you're describing. So all the items are perfect substitutes of each other. But if this function f, for example, is decreasing in the distance, which is what typically one expects, that the further away you are from an intermediate good producer, and the less useful will be the input that is provided, then you have the substitutability.
Agostino, just also kind of coming back to Selman's and point. It's unclear for me to that you know, if you move from this linear production, I understand that it brings a lot of good things, so like tractability. But if you would like to include some of those concerns, that the ones that Selman was putting there, maybe you can say instead of the sum, it's just the product. And then if it's a product, you know, you will need at least to have demand something from each of the guys. Otherwise, you know, you're gonna generate zero. But that brings other trouble. So maybe you know, you lose tractability, but you get the feeling of, you know, I may need a little bit of everything to produce something. But yeah, I don't know. And the other thing is that when you start demanding from several folks at the same time, you may generate multiple equilibria, and then you bring all those you know, potentially interesting features, but at the same time you may lose tractability. So I kind of see the beauty of the simplicity, but I also think that these other dimensions are, you know, quite exciting to explore.
Yeah, no, good point. I just want to briefly respond, and then I want to give also Chuan an opportunity to say more. I think the best way to think of this is not really the best way to think about where this model applies is not really having like multiple goods that you need in order to produce. It's more that if you have to buy a specific good, then where would you go, right? And it's more like production of a single good rather than like having multiple goods, multiple inputs in order to produce a final item. I mean, otherwise, I agree. If you have to produce a car, you're saying you need the wheel, you need electronics, and so on, and then you need to buy like from the different individual producers producing each of these different items. So that's, I think, what I understand you were referring to.
But it also has other implications when the fact that, you know, I'm just demanding or I'm getting my things from one single guy. You can exploit later on. You're going to exploit this notion of market power. When market power is going to be related with the fact that I'm just getting my things from one single guy. If I'm getting my things from several different guys, market power, my ability to exert market power might be diminished. So there might have consequence on that dimension too. But I understand that, you know, I like, you know, the Mickey Mouse model that, you know, as long as you can deliver something the simplest way possible, that's the way according to me. So
no, thanks for making this point, Carlos. Chuan, you wanted to say something?
I think both of them make great points that we don't look at complementarity. So there are papers in the literature where the supply chain is you need something bespoke from your upstream that no one else can supply. So if that upstream fund goes down, you're in so much trouble. So in a sense, what we're answering in this paper is, if the world is exactly described in those bespoke complementarity models, then the solution you would imagine would be if we had off-the-shelf products that people can pull off, even if it's imperfectly substitutable. So what we're trying to address is, suppose what we're trying to show is, even if that existed, that those kind of off-the-shelf market existed, we can still show there's underinvestment capacity. And that is our value add relative to papers that have all these richer dimensions, which begs the question, what if everything was substitutable?
Sean, along those lines, so sorry to drag this along. So, you know, now this looks more like, okay, you know what, the price of oil is going to change because we can or cannot buy from this supplier or that supplier, but it's all about oil kind of model, right? And also the capacity constraint isn't exactly the capacity constraint. Now, I'm kind of, in this sense, failing to see how this is about fragility rather than efficiency. And along those lines, it feels like it would not be too difficult to extend this output yi to capture a simple form, such as, you know, the minimum of that summation and another summation, right? But first summation is over a set J1, the second summation is over a set J2. So J1 is microchips, J2 is iron, and you're going to build cars, right? And then obviously within suppliers of microchips, there are these Fs. Within suppliers of like iron or steel, there are these Fs, right? Now, in that sense, if one class of input gets a shock, then we can, I think that relates a little bit more to fragility of supply chains. So when we have this perfectly substitutable environment, it sounds quite a bit more like efficiency. Do you have any comments on that?
We do it very briefly because I realize we're 40 minutes in and we still haven't got to most of the model yet. But yes, the title of the paper is how to be efficiently resilient.
Yeah.
So it does have a lot to do with efficiency, and we'll show in the results later that it's not efficient to invest in 100% resilience, that you can absorb any possible shock that the world can throw at you. In fact, the social planners benchmark doesn't do that at all. So we're very much focused on what's efficiently resilient, and it's in the title of our paper.
Yeah, and just to add, Salman, briefly, the resilience doesn't mean, I think here we think of resilience as somewhat robustness with respect to shock. So how strong is the supply chain network able to absorb or to respond to shocks in terms of investing sufficiently in production capacity? We are not thinking about resilience against, for example, defaults that could occur. So it's resilience really in terms of robustness, I mean, to shocks.
Okay, great, thank you.
Ability to recover quickly from a shock. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
See, let's go to the next slide. I was worried that I had few slides, but it seems that I might not be able to finish here in the slides that we have. But let's go to the model now and think about, okay, what happens here? Like, what's the equilibrium that we're trying to solve, and what's the timeline of the model? The final good firms can order intermediate goods through two markets, as I mentioned. The future markets at time t equals to 0, where you lock in a specific quantity for a specific price, and the spot market at time t equals to 1. So essentially at time t equals to 0, trading on the future market are essentially pre-orders. So final good producers commit to purchase a quantity denoted by Q3 at a fixed price phi for delivery in time t equals to 1. And then intermediate good producers are choosing the pre-order price phi, so at what price they will sell this future contract, and also they will decide how much they want to invest in the non-scalable capacity K. Then at time t equals to 1, the uncertainty about consumer demand Q and about supply shocks is realizing. So we know what is QI, the final good consumer, the demand from consumer for the final good producer I. We know what is the supply shocks WI. And final good firms can purchase any additional intermediate goods that they need from the spot market. So Q spot is the quantity that the intermediate good, that the final good producer I is purchasing from J in the spot market at a price PJ. And the intermediate good firms here are competing by setting spot prices P, and also produced by employing the scalable inputs L.
So quick, just clarification question. Yeah. Are the prices set before? So for each period, so let's say period 0, the prices are set before the pre-order. It sounded like you're saying they submit pre-orders and then the firms compete on price. And the same question for T equal 1, just the order of price setting versus pre-order.
Yes, so I think the period 0, basically the firm, I think this will come in a moment. I have the exact equations that will be used, but essentially they choose the prices and quantity at which the pre-order will occur. So you decide before what are the prices and quantities, and then the pre-order, the quantity will be purchased.
The decisions in each period is simultaneous.
Is what, sorry?
It's simultaneous. So
simultaneous,
each period, all these decisions in each period is simultaneous.
But then when I submit, let's say I'm the final good, when I submit my order, I don't know the price. Is my order including the price I'm willing to buy at, or so otherwise that the firms will price at infinity, right? It's not.
So it's kind of, there's a kind of little bit of jump. So like all Nash equilibrium, right? You submit, the firms submit a menu of prices, phis, and then the final good producers look at their menu of prices, submit pre-orders. but the manual price is set given the intermediate good producers know the demand function of the final good producer. So they kind of determined simultaneously. There's no it's not a sequential move game in a sense, right? In each period it's a simultaneous move game. But everyone knows each other's demand function or pricing function.
Well, but that's sorry to harp on that. If it's just an equilibrium and they're both announced simultaneously, then I can deviate and say, as a firm, as a intermediate good, and say my price is infinity. That'll be off equilibrium. But if it's really simultaneous decision, now the firm that submitted the pre-order, the final good, is faced with infinity and locked into that. So there has to be either an order or a conditional. My pre-order is conditional on price, or it's a curve or something like that.
It's a demand function. You essentially, the way it works mathematically is final good firms have a demand function, and the intermediate good firms take that into account and set a menu of prices, and the intersection is our equilibrium outcome.
Okay, so they submit their demand function, they're committed to their demand.
At a given price. You demand this at a given price. You don't say, I want to buy 10 units. Tell me.
Essentially the
QIJ prices and I put in, when we talk about it in realistic terms, there is something sequential, but as with all natural equilibrium models, the equilibrium outcome is a kind of a simultaneous outcome. If that makes sense. But we can probably talk about that at the end.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. But I think I agree with Chuan. Like this, the QIJ will be depending on the price that is set. So let's see. Maybe this will be just basically in summary. We have these two sectors. We have a discrete number of intermediate good firms, a continuum of final good firms. I mean, the final good firms are operating a linear production function with intermediate goods as imperfect substitutes. The intermediate good firms are operating a Cobb-Douglas production function where K has to be committed one period in advance. And the core result really is that the level of investment of the firms in non-scalable production capacity, which is the decentralized equilibrium solution, is smaller than the social planner optimal solution. And in order to show this result, and this goes back to some of the questions that Carlos was asking before, we impose symmetry. So the alpha is equal to alpha, so the level of scalability is the same across all industry. Also, the demand for each final good producer is the same, and also we look for like equilibrium where the WJ is equal to W, so the price of the scalable input factor is the same for all firms, for all intermediate good producer. And we also impose this full production assumption, which essentially says that the quantity of final goods produced will always be sufficient to meet the demand. In fact, this full production assumption, on the one hand, it simplifies the analysis, but it also shows that our results does not depend on the occurrence of rare or large shocks, right? In fact, in the paper, we also discuss how relaxing this assumption, so making sure that, for example, you may not be able to meet the full demand. So this YTLI, which is final good producer production, is smaller than Q. Relaxing this would strengthen our argument that the market will underinvest in capacity. In fact, it will underinvest in capacity even more. So essentially, we have discussion of this in the paper. And as I mentioned, there is the demand function is also a demand distribution, which is bounded from a lower bar Q bar I and upper bar Q bar I, and the same is for the supply, as I mentioned before. Good. So let's go. Let's now look at first best. I mean, this I think is, because I realized that there is not much time, I will skip this benchmark, which is basically the situation where the social planner has perfect foresight. And this is really an idealized case where you can perfectly predict the states that will rise in period one. You can basically have full visibility about what will be the demand and the supply shocks, QI and WJ. And this is basically equivalent to saying that the social planner is operating a production technology without delays. So that means that really K and L, both non-scalable and scalable production capacity, can be adjusted frictionlessly after the planner observed the realization of demand and supply. Right? That's really the first case benchmark. Now, the more interesting benchmark or more suitable to show the inefficiencies, the constrained optimal social benchmark, where the social planner is facing the same information and technological constraint as the private market participant. That means that he doesn't know in advance what will be the supply and demand shock. He has the same distribution as the private market participants. And also he faced it has the same production constraint in terms of there is a non-scalable production capacity that needs to be reserved 1 period in advance. And this case, under this constraint optimal benchmark, basically the social planner, as I mentioned, has to commit to a level of capacity investment before the state of the work is revealed. And the key difference compared to the market solution is that the planner does not rely on price signals to maximize individual profits. So there is no need for contracts or market, because it can simply dictate the order flow between firms I and J in order to maximize aggregate welfare. Okay, so proposition 1, which is in the paper, basically characterizes the level of capacity investment under each of these benchmarks. So under the perfect foresight benchmark, both the non-scalable and the scalable part of the production capacity can be adjusted flexibly depending on the state, because you know exactly what will be Q and W. And therefore, the optimality condition for K is derived in the standard way as for the Douglas production function. Right? Instead, I think if we think about the unconstrained, the constrained optimal case, where the planner, again, has the same information and technology constraint as the firms, then the planner must now commit to a capacity KSP, the non-scalable production capacity, 1 period in advance, based on her expectation of the state in the next period. So that's why you see this expectation here, because you don't know what will be Q and W. So you have to compute this in expectation. So it's similar, but basically depends on the expectation. And choosing the right level of capacity is important, because once you fix the KSP, once you fix this non-scalable production capacity, then the marginal productivity at time 1 is diminishing in L. So it's diminishing in the level of the scalable input factor. And I think this also goes back to the question that was asked by Raike earlier on. And then this basically the constraint optima, basically what we show is that the constraint optimal social planner is investing in greater capacity on average. So essentially, this concavity in the marginal productivity of the scalable input L means that the constraint social planner, who basically uses rational expectation, is investing more than a planner with perfect foresight would do on average, precisely because, like, what could happen is that there might be some shocks, right, which are on the which could be larger than anticipated, and in order to account for that, he wants to invest slightly more than what would be the average level that he would need compared to the to perfect knowledge. So that means that he's still despite not being any risk aversion, he's still investing more than what the perfect social planner with perfect foresight would do on average. Okay, so I think there is, I think one could basically gain some intuition about this result from the proof, but because of time constraints, I will skip it. I will go now to the decentralized market solution. So far, we have spoken about the centralized solution. Now, let's consider, compute the decentralized solution, and we solve for this. This is a sub-game. This is basically a game with 2 stages. So we want to look at sub-game perfect Nash equilibrium. As usual, we solve it backward, starting from the spot market. And in period 1, final good firms are observing the realized demand for the final good, and they are comparing it against the amount that they can produce from period 0 using the pre-order market. So essentially, they will choose. They will. What they will do is they will find exactly the solution. So if the pre-orders fall short, then they will try to compensate for this shortfall by ordering through the spot market to make up for the difference. And intuitively, what we expect is that the final good firms are ordering from the set of supplier which are offering the lowest effective price. So the lowest in the sense that it's basically the lowest price once we adjust for this function f of the distance between I and j. And only if the effective price is lower than the valuation of the final product fee, then they will basically buy. Otherwise, it's not efficient to do that.
So Agostino, would they like to buy options instead of just futures?
You're saying if one has also access to an option market, would it be more preferable than investing in the future market? Yeah, I mean, according to this, I mean, we didn't consider that in the paper because we wanted to contrast spot with future. But if you had access to an option market, then then basically you would only buy, because of this end statement here, you might decide to see whether or not you want to buy an option, because you only need to exercise it if the valuation of the final product is larger than this quantity. Yeah.
Right. It would be interesting if you could show that, because it doesn't I mean, like in corporate finance, they sometimes come to this conclusion that like there's not really any good reason to ever trade options. But there's this idea that somehow some people have these nonlinear demands. And so it's nice that you get that, because options just seem to be pervasive in these markets.
I think it's a very good point. Very great. It's a great comment, which definitely think this could be. And in fact, I think if we had option instead of future, like it could be actually more efficient to buy an option here.
Agostino, just a reminder, we have 4 minutes left
in
the seminar part, but there was already lots of questions. We can use some of the Q&A for you to conclude as well.
Okay. So I think I'm not too far from the end. I think let's basically discuss the strategy for ordering in the spot market. And then I think intermediate good firms will have to set the spot market prices. Like that's the other decision variable. And they are engaging in monopolistic competition and set spot prices that are marked up over marginal cost, right? So that's P star is equal to U is equal to the marginal cost plus mu times the marginal cost, which is like a markup coming from the fact that they engage in monopolistic competition. And now let's go to the centralized market solution, which is what happens in period zero. So in period zero, the firms are maximizing individual profits, taking the demand function of the final good firm as given. Okay, so maybe Itai's question is partly addressed by this, like the demand function is taken as given. Okay, in equilibrium, the pre-order prices are set to the, I mean, let's see what we do. Basically, we set the future prices, the pre-order prices as the expected value of the spot prices. And this is the unconditional expectation. And then final good firms will only pre-order on the future market from the intermediate good firm that offers the lowest effective price. Again, effective price in terms of counting for the distance penalty. And then the amount that is pre-ordered is essentially only, I mean, this is chosen in a way to cover the lowest possible realization of the demand. And let's now see. Okay, maybe let's keep that because of the lack of time. So now let me look at the comparison between the optimal and the social plan, the equilibrium solution K star and the social planner solution, which I think is useful. So this is the central proposition, and we arrive at this conclusion by comparing basically the characterization of K star relative to KSP. And one of the key difference is basically this additional term that you see in this expectation, right? If we look at the centralized solution, is the equation that pins down exactly K star is this equation here, where alpha K star is equal to 1 minus alpha times the expected value of WL star plus this expected value of the marginal or the derivative of the spot price with respect to the production capacity K times the aggregate production in the spot market. And the first part is the first part, which is the derivative here of P star with respect to A, is somewhat the pecuniary externality, the response of spot market prices to capacity investment. So that's the pecuniary externality that we have in the model. And intuitively, and this quantity is negative. That's the key point. And basically, intuition is that cost savings from increasing capacity investment cannot really be fully captured by the intermediate good producers, which are making the investment, because it's partially passed on to the final good producers by lowering the spot prices, right? So then if they overinvest in production capacity, they will not be able to capture these benefits because they basically be able to lower the spot prices for the final good producer. So essentially, the final good producer would have would enjoy a benefit. And vice versa, cost inefficiency from suboptimal capacity investment would be passed on through higher spot market prices. So if they sub-invest in production capacity, then they would be able to raise the spot pricing, the prices in the spot market, and therefore charge this cost to the final good producer. And if we take this together, this means that intermediate good producers will always lean towards underinvestment in production capacity, because again, the cost would be passed on to the final good producers. And that's, I think, the main result, and that's the reason for this. The result K star smaller than KSP. I think it's also interesting to look at the separate the effect of substitutability and scalability in the model. And I think this is basically appears very nicely in the expression that we have, because the spot market price, remember, is given by a markup over the marginal costs. So all else being equal, higher investment in production capacity is lowering the marginal cost in every possible state, and as a result, it's lowering the spot market, the spot prices. And the extent to which K plays a role depends on how scalable the economy is. So if scalability of the industry increases, which means alpha becomes larger, then the less important becomes K in production, because you can scale up production easily, and therefore the externality is shrinking. Similarly, if we think about the impact of K on P, this is also multiplied by the markup, which depends on the substitutability between sectors, which is captured through this function f prime, right? F is the distance function, f prime is the derivative of the distance function, and this is basically capturing the impact of K, or the scalable production capacity on prices. So higher substitutability between sectors, which means the derivative f prime of d is larger than 0, lowers the markup and reduces this wedge in equilibrium. And finally, if the number of good intermediate good firms increases, which means there is greater competition, then essentially we have that the markup shrinks to 0. Okay, good. So I think there are some, maybe some, I just want to make a few remarks that we basically looked also at the case where we relaxed the full production assumption. And in this case, we end up, that the potential market reach of intermediate good producers will overlap with each other. And but because of time limitation, I will not discuss this too much here, but happy to go over during the Q&A, like in the 15 minutes that we have. And similarly, I think, again, this relaxing assumption leads to interesting result, because we can end up from the case where we have local monopolies, where like basically each intermediate producer has a market reach which is not overlapping with the other, to the case where there might be competition between final good producers, between intermediate good producers. Right. And just a few, just want to conclude highlighting some potential policy implications of this framework. I think one way to reduce this inefficiency is basically to subsidize capacity investment, because we have seen that the firms, if left on their own, intermediate producer will sub-invest in production capacity, in the non-scalable production capacity, because they don't want to to basically give benefits to the final good producer through lower prices. So one way to subsidize capacity investment is to reduce somewhat the cost of K through subsidies. And a more complex policy will be to subsidize pre-orders and tax spot market transactions. This would enhance incentives for the use of pre-order markets, and would also be able to offer the upstream firms the assurance of recouping these initial costs. And maybe another another policy, I think, application here could be that, and this is probably the hardest option, is to change the structural parameters of the economy. For example, try to improve substitutability, try to improve scalability, and try to increase competition, which, as we know, competition is always good in its own right, but if we think about this problem in the supply chain, it becomes even better. And I think with this, I would like to end the talk. As I mentioned, the main result has been that supply networks, market-based supply networks, are inherently fragile. We have shown exactly the reason why the inefficiently resilient happens is due to this pecuniary externality, where upstream firms do not fully internalize the benefits of building production capacity ex ante. And we have also explained why what are the underlying causes of this inefficiency, like especially focusing on market incompleteness and market power. And we have basically highlighted all the ways that these externalities can be reduced in terms of scalability, substitutability, and competition. And thanks a lot for your time and for the questions. Happy to have a more detailed discussion in the remaining minutes.
Yeah. Thanks, Agostino, for the great presentation. Now we move to the Q&A for the next 10 minutes. And Alexander, you have a question, I guess.
Yeah, thanks, Agostino, for the talk. So I just didn't want to interrupt you at the end, but I was really curious about, so it seems that if you don't have demand uncertainty, right, you will always fulfill everything through the pre-order market, right? So there will be no essentially inefficiency because nothing is going to be ordered on spot market. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think if you have if you have no demand uncertainty, which means that you are at a situation where you can predict precisely what will be the Q and W, right? Sorry, you are able to predict Q for sure. Then then I think basically you would be able to fulfill your demand using the pre-order market.
And then there's going to basically no inefficiency, right? Because there will be no, this pecuniary externality is going to be basically multiplying zero spot demand.
Let's say the pecuniary externality, yes, then exactly. I think there should be no sub-investment in, you wouldn't invest in, you wouldn't sub-invest in production capacity ex ante if you are the intermediate good firms.
Yeah, and the sort of related question here is that, so it wasn't super clear to me, why is that pre-order market actually even exists, right? Because ultimately the final good firms, they're indifferent between ordering the spot market and on their pre-order market, because the price is set, the phi is set to the expected price, and given they are risk neutral, essentially they are indifferent. So I was just wondering whether there's like an equilibrium in which the price is the same, but they actually fulfill only part of it, part of this, Q lower bar for the pre-order market, given they're indifferent. And I think that's going to actually be kind of very different from, that will have different implications for the amount of underinvestment, because if you fulfill like only half of your lowest Q lower bar, then the pecuniary externality is going to be much stronger in a sense. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's maybe it's the only outcome, that it will always sort of fulfill this Q lower bar, but it wasn't clear to me.
Yeah, that's a good point. Tran, do you want to step in here?
It's a very astute observation. Yes, they are, the final good producers are at a point of indifference here. And so they can either buy 0 or Q lower bar. So we chose the upper amount because if they chose 0, the wedge is going to be even larger because they're fulfilling more through the spot market in a sense. And similarly for if they choose a combination of anything between 0 and Q.
I see. Okay. So basically, if you choose some kind of a different equilibrium, then you can have like even stronger result. Like,
yes.
Okay, so then you will have this result even if you have no demand uncertainty. If you choose that.
Yes, because we're trying to argue the pre-order market reduces the wedge. So if we go to the extreme where no one used the pre-order market, we have even more extreme.
Yeah. So in a way, the pre-order market is also reducing the incompleteness that we have in terms of contracts.
Jinwook, you have a question?
Yes, reciprocal of time. I'll be very quick. So like, how does the direction or the position of the market power actually matter? So like, if it is flipped, like the monopsony issue rather than just monopoly, I kind of my conjecture is that the underinvestment will still will be remaining because of this. The issue is like there's still a wedge. So you even if you invest, you won't really recoup all the benefits of this increased capacity. Yeah. Just curious if you considered that.
It's a very good challenge. Haven't considered that. It's the short answer, but it's quite interesting. I think other conference participants have pointed similar things. Like right now, most of the market power sits with the intermediate good firm, and we have a continuum of final good firm who, by construction, have very little power. What happens if it's switched? We would conjecture it would reduce the wedge, but it's not a result we have in the paper.
Yeah, and it could be I think if we go for a continuum of intermediate and discrete oligopolistic sector of final good producers, we might have also that the wedge becomes the opposite. Like K-star would be larger than KSP. Sorry, it's more than KSP.
Rakesh, did you have a question?
My question was already asked.
Oh, okay. Michael?
Yeah, Augustine, thanks for the presentation.
Thank you, Michael.
Kind of going back to some of the comments I think made by Salman and Carlos, there seems to be kind of a way of kind of linking this to the older results, thinking about two different types of suppliers and time and consistency, and in particular, I wonder whether the right interpretation is really market power in this context when we're thinking about this investment that leads to potential overcapacity of the firm and how they need to recoup the costs, given that they have some local monopoly power over the final goods producers. So, in the end, the channel here is not through the final goods producers committing or not committing. It's through the level of competition you expect in the future if you were to choose it. And that level of K, there is some increase in K that's resulting from you thinking about other producers underinvesting, but that's bounded above by the fact that if everyone starts to overproduce or choose a high K, then you're going to cut into your kind of profit. So I think maybe it would be worth considering thinking about how this is linked to it. I mean, there's a different mechanism here, but kind of the overall observation might be useful to, in the context of thinking about what is, how we should be interpreting this K being lower than K star.
Yeah, so Michael, you're suggesting like somewhat like see whether or not this K stars more than KSP result can emerge by studying like or considering somewhat a different mechanism than the one that we have here, which has less to do with market power and market incompleteness.
Yeah, so alternatively, I think the interpretation, there is a market power element to it. Whether that's the underinvestment itself is not due to that. It's partly due to the fact that they cannot, they're choosing, they need to choose a larger K than ex post. It might, they're not able to recoup the cost that they want to. And I think that's kind of speaks to the R, some of the policy implications that you have to R. So that might be worth thinking about. I think it's more in terms of trying to understand or writing out the exposition for where the inefficiencies lie and how it links to some of the other forces that we kind of know about.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I agree. Yeah, somewhat like you're right that basically the main source of inefficiency is precisely the fact that you're passing on. You're not able to pass the cost that you're incurring today to the final good producers. That's why you choose to suboptimal invest. I mean, the reason why would I end that in, but somewhat the imperfect substitutability of the intermediate good producer, which is basically our measure of market power here, somewhat is impacting or influencing this result. But I agree with you that maybe it's worth basically to highlight even better like why this plays a role in this core proposition.
Another way to do something along those lines, Agostino, might be to explore other aggregation functions in this final equation you have. So in that, instead of a sum, could be, you know, as Selman was saying, it's going to be the minimum of two numbers, or it's going to be, I don't know, the multiplication of some numbers, and that can speak to other kind of type of mechanisms of what Michael was suggesting. So that could be one way of kind of materializing those suggestions into the paper, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Like I think maybe we could add the robustness analysis with respect to this linear production function that we have here, and what happens if we have the two groups that Selman was mentioning before, or like multiplication, which is another way.
Ali, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Samit. So it's, I think, more like a clarifying question, because I really like the paper and I think that I understood the intuition under it. But when I was reading the paper, I got confused because in the introduction, you also mentioned instances of bankruptcies, for example, right? Like of a shipping company or construction company, and how it affects their clients or suppliers. However, in the model, I think that you explicitly shut down bankruptcy, right? Because there's this no default condition. So
yes, exactly. No, I agree.
How should I think about it? Or maybe somebody already asked it, because it's also to me such an obvious question. Sorry if I'm completely missing the point there.
No, I think this is a great point. In fact, I think defaults are, as you said, shut it down in the middle, in the sense that firms will always be able to honor the future contract. If they enter into the product market, they will always be able to honor it. I think, the default is basically one important element that we were thinking of considering, which one in a somewhat an extension of this model, where we allow, let's say, intermediate good or even pilot good producers to default, which can give rise to a lot of other interesting implications. But perhaps, like, here we really think about resilience, not in terms of resilience against defaults and the ability of the network to recover from defaults, but more in terms of how much the network is able to absorb shocks, like how quick it is able to scale up the production to compensate for shocks. But Joan, do you want to add more?
I think it's a great observation, and my defense for it is in the same vein as the lack of complementarity or bespoke inputs. Is those things that make the model richer is only going to push our results in the direction we want. So we're assuming away bankruptcy and critical dependence on one particular supplier, and we can still show this kind of inefficient investment resilience. So if we add in those more breaking points, hopefully it will go in the direction that we want.
Thank you.
Salman?
So I know this is going to be a bit too much to ask, maybe in another paper, but so I think one key assumption that underlies some of the insight is the lack of price discrimination. And I often think of a good chunk of supply chains to supply networks to allow for differential pricing. And so that might resolve some of the inefficiencies. Well, it's going to distort the market power in someone's favor, obviously, but I think it might indeed fix some of the inefficiencies. And it would be, I think, interesting to explore that, not necessarily here, but, in a follow-up or something. And then in that regard, most of the insights about, some extensions reinforcing the results, I think some of those might turn around if price discrimination was allowed. So, for example, if there was a bunch of firms who are a little bit more susceptible, but one that is more resilient, like in a model where there are defaults and so on, the resilient firm may sort of diversify against which of the other non-resilient firms are going to default, and so may want to overproduce. And in fact, anecdotally speaking, even in non-durable goods, I've heard of instances where now the secondary market is kind of emerging, and there's oftentimes, there's not like a one marketplace where everybody goes and trades, right? There are bilateral relationships, and sometimes some downstream firms need more input, and then some upstream had underproduced, some had overproduced, and now these secondary markets are emerging where some overproducers are exerting some market power in a secondary market. Now, if these types of, again, this is not really for this paper, but if these types of, I think, nuances were somehow incorporated, I think, the ability to price discriminate and make the market a bit more decentralized, as is the case in supply networks, might have some significant qualitative implications, I think, which I think would be important to explore. So K-star being less than KSP, I think would be a robust insight, but it would be important to see what is the underlying, what is the major reason behind it in a more, I would say, a bilateral market.
No, these are great observations, Salman. I think basically what you said is, in order to account for these forces that you're outlining, one would definitely need to introduce defaults into the model and also allow for some heterogeneity, right? Because this gives reason to price discrimination or diversification. And then I think, then the question is whether or not this result, how robust is this result that we have now, K-star smaller than KSP would be. It's definitely, definitely an interesting point. As we mentioned, accounting for defaults should strengthen the results, as Sean also mentioned. Now, if we allow for heterogeneity, and if we allow and we increase the action space along the lines that we are describing, it might be that there might be, exactly, other interesting economic forces which could help explain even better, this core result. But as you said, this requires a very different study because it also necessitates a very different framework than the one we have.
Bruno, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll try to be fast. Thank you very much for giving the talk. So maybe I didn't follow exactly all the equations. So one question is, you're assuming symmetry.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there could be a equilibrium where one, say two farms, one farm overinvests in capital and the other invests little, and whether these kind of incentives to keep the other firm from investing could drive capital up. And one here is simultaneous. So one of the questions is there this type of multiple equilibrium in the simultaneous game? And the second one is whether you could, if this investment capacity don't happen overnight, right? They are housed, they are out there.
Yeah.
So whether if you have a sequential game where, say, again, with two firms, initial firm announce the investment capacity to make sure the second firm invests little, and whether this could either improve welfare, because we know we could have this investment as an additional incentive to actually take over the market and act more as a monopolist. And I don't know, Eddie, think about that and how you think that could play out.
Yeah, no, it's great. totally agree. I mean, this is somewhat the symmetry assumption is key for these results. I think if we relax it, I mean, I think the forces you're describing, I presume will be there. I mean, it's hard for me to see exactly what would happen. Joan, do you want to add something here?
I think those are very good points, and we're working on some numerical simulations to try to assess some of the case studies you mentioned, but in particular, if some subset overinvests, the other subset underinvests, that's very interesting to look at. But that's no longer analytically tractable, so we would need some numerical simulation.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe sometimes if just to illustrate the force, if you can do like just two firms, it might be already like be enough, right? Like then you just have two capitals and two prices. You could also try. I mean, now we are speculating. I don't want to spend too much, but I can also try with like even number of firms, and then you have like just two groups: the high investment, the low investment. That might be for appendix, but I just like think that could be something interesting.
Right. But what you are, Bruno, what you are conjecturing is that there could be some firms for which KSTAR-I would be smaller and some other for which it would be larger than KSP, or you think that's what you're suggesting?
Well, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, or they could both be smaller but get closer to the social planner, or further away. I don't know.
Because I think exactly. I think, Joan, we believe that even with heterogeneity, I mean, based on the numerical results, I mean, we didn't explore them in full, but somehow this inefficiency in terms of sub-investment should still be there. Like, but because I mean, both of them are basically suffering from not being able to pass on the cost to the final good producer to the final good producers. But you're saying, but definitely there might be that they get closer.
Yeah,
to the social planner solution.
Maybe that's easier to see with like two firms, right? Like if there is an asymmetric equilibrium that one basically takes over the market and the other invests very little, you could have get very close to the social plan if that's an equilibrium, right? Like I don't know if it is, but
I think that you can still get some degree of, because now we're talking about the equilibrium on the kind of the symmetric equilibrium. And I think the notion of symmetry here is gonna live in this plane between how the network looks like and how these alphas look like. So take the picture you have there. You have a circle, and then everyone is kind of the same, and then you're imposing that kind of symmetry with the equal alpha. Now take the same circle, cut one of these ties and then just put a line. What you're gonna have is that the guy in the middle is gonna be different from the guys in the extremes, but the guys in the extreme are gonna be equal. So you still have a way of exploiting this kind of symmetry and getting somewhere there. And I guess you need more than two to take or to kind of exploit kind of what is the role that the difference in distance plays. So, but I guess you can get still the results with symmetry. But again, the symmetry plays in these two roles, like how the network looks like and how these alphas look like the distribution. That would be my suggestion to kind of move on along those lines.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, one possibility would also be to maybe relax some of the symmetry. Maybe the alpha are different, but the demand is the same, or vice versa, like the alpha is the same and the consumer demand is different, just to see exactly what is driving mostly the results. But thanks, Carlo. This is a great point.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks Agostino, Chuan, and all the panelists for the very active seminar and the discussion.
Yeah, this has been extremely active. Thanks, everybody. Great.
Yeah, this was our last seminar of this semester. So hopefully we are gonna see you all in fall.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sammy.